Welcome back to Renewed Hope After Loss. I'm your host, Kelli Sheumaker. If you're new to this podcast, this is a place for real conversations about the heartache and pain of loss, but how you can find hope again. And today, I am so excited to have a very special guest. She's my mentor, Lois Hall. Lois has an incredible background in public health. She served as the executive director of the Ohio Public Health Association, and she is a longtime trainer of the Grief Recovery Institute, and she worked there. She mentored a lot of us. She was fantastic. Through her company, Starfish Associates, she offers consulting and training in grief. There's a wonderful course she always teaches is Helping Children with Loss, which is for adults, and much more. Today, we're diving into a conversation that impacts all of us, the vital connection between mental health and emotional health. We'll explore how unresolved grief affects our overall well-being and other things. I am so excited to have you, Lois. Thank you so much for joining me.
You are very welcome. I'm excited to be here too. Thank you.
So, Lois, if you don't mind, could you start what brought you to the Grief Recovery Institute or just the grief recovery method in general?
Sure, absolutely. So it was that career in public health that brought me. I worked for the Ohio Department of Health for 30 years, 1978 through 2008. And my specialty area was weird, mysterious diseases. And so the first one that I worked with was Reye syndrome. And probably a lot of people haven't ever heard of it. And that's because the study that we did was so successful that it really kind of put the lid on that one. But Reye syndrome was a childhood illness. It was mysterious. It was unknown what the cause was back in the 70s. But the study we did actually put the link between aspirin and Reye syndrome. Children who got the flu or chickenpox, those who were given aspirin to bring down their fever were more likely to go on and get Reye syndrome than those who were not given aspirin or any product with acetylsalicylic acid in it. Learned that one a long time ago. And one of the things that would happen is the kids' brains would swell. And I don't know if this is still one of the treatments, but they would literally, as I understand it, I never saw this, but as I understand it, they would cut the skull so that the brain could swell without becoming more damaged. And imagine being a parent and seeing your kid in the ICU in that condition. And then as the news started to come out about aspirin, those parents would go, I gave him the aspirin. I gave him the aspirin. Why didn't I know? And so that was really when my first interest in grief was piqued. Legionnaire's disease was new in the 70s. Toxic shock was new in the 70s. Kawasaki disease was new in the 70s. And so I was the weird, mysterious disease lady doing epidemiology on those conditions. In 1981, a new weird, mysterious disease came on the scene, and it was affecting young gay men from California and New York. As we know it now, it turned out to be AIDS, HIV. But back then, again, it was this weird, mysterious disease. It was related primarily in the beginning to young gay men. And COVID reminded me so much of it. The fear, the mysteriousness, the death rates. And there was nothing people could do about it in the beginning. And so again, I was struck by the grief that the young men had, their partners, their community, but particularly their parents. And the caregivers, the professionals, the doctors, the nurses, et cetera. Because, with most infectious diseases, they give you some kind of a medication and you get better and you go home. That didn't happen in the early days of AIDS. And the families couldn't tell anybody, right? I called it the awful secret. Hey, my son is here. He's doing well. How's yours? Well, he's at home. He's back from California and he's got AIDS. They couldn't tell anybody. And so keeping it inside, they were grieving. And there was nothing that public health, at least, was doing at that time to help them with that. And again, the professionals, doctors, nurses, et cetera, chaplains, clergy. And so I asked a friend whose son had died by suicide, what did she have to offer for grief, or what would she suggest? And she told me about this guy by the name of John W. James, how he had written this grief recovery handbook. He was from California. I'm in Ohio, but he was coming to Ohio to speak at a National Compassionate Friends Conference, which literally was in the very next block to my office. So I snuck over on my lunch hour, stood in the back of the conference room, and heard John talk, and I was hooked. Everything he said just made so much sense. So I had Centers for Disease Control grant dollars, and so over the next several years, I invited John to come to Ohio and talk to physicians and talk to chaplains and talk to nurses and talk to families. And finally, taking him back to the airport one day, he said, Hall, I'm not coming back to do any more talks till you get trained. So I met John in the 80s. I knew about the program. I read the book, but I didn't really do the exercises, as most people don't if they just read the book. So I took my training in 1998 with John, and I've been a grief recovery method specialist in the Central Ohio area since that time. So what's that, like 25 years or something? I started when I was 12. So anyway, so I did that. And then in 2001, in the summer of 2001, they called and wanted to know, would I be interested in being a trainer for them? And I said, well, no, I've got a day job. I've got kids. I've got a life. I could never do that. And then 911 happened, and we grieved as a nation. So I called him back and I said, if you're interested in me, I'm interested in you. So that began my job with them as a trainer. I think I did my first solo class in 2002, spring of 2002. And so I was still working for the Ohio Department of Health. And so I would literally take vacation days, Thursday, Friday, and Monday and Tuesday, to travel someplace and do these trainings, right? So I used up 4 days of vacation to go train people to do the grief recovery method. And people would say, well, how can you stand in a room with all those grieving people and they didn't understand. So I love your goal for today is coming from that heartbreak and pain to a place of hope. I started telling people when I was doing the trainings on the last day of the training, you came here wanting to be trained as a grief recovery method specialist. I am indeed sending you home being a grief recovery method specialist, but I am also sending you home being a hope bringer, right?
Yeah.
Because to me, this program, that's the outcome. That's the result. 99% of the time, at least, is that people realize, yes, there is heartbreak and there is sadness and there is pain. But if you use these tools and you get that grief out of you, you identify it, you name it, you talk about it, you give it voice, it really does turn full circle for almost everyone who completes the program and takes it seriously to bring them a sense of hope. I've got hope. First of all, I'm not alone. There are other people in this group too. I'm not crazy, right? And that's going to feed into your topic about mental health versus emotional health.
Absolutely.
And I see other people who have survived this. And so I called them hope bringers. And I still believe that that's exactly what the program does. It helps bring hope. And so I left the Ohio Department of Health after my 30-year term was up there. That's when I went to be the executive director of the Ohio Public Health Association. I continued to be a trainer for them throughout that time. And then in 2016, they asked me if I would come on board as a full-time employee for them. And so I said, absolutely, yes. So from 2016 to 2024, I worked as one of the support persons for the Grief Recovery Institute, doing a lot of Zoom phone calls with our specialists, encouraging them, helping them get started, answering their questions, solving their problems. And then in 2024, for a variety of reasons, they needed to let several of us go. It was difficult for them over COVID and with the economy. But I still, you mentioned Starfish Associates, that's my little company. So I still do grief recovery work. I still have contracts and clients, and I'm working almost as hard as I have before. But I love it. I love it because you can literally, physically, visibly see the hope return.
Yes.
When people go through the program. So that's my story. That's my story.
Thank you very much for sharing that. I love it. One of the things you said is so important is if they do the work, the hope returns if they do the work. Like you said before, you had the book, but you never did any of the exercises. And even doing the exercises by yourself, you still sometimes don't get the full effect. It really is somebody that's trained in it, because it is a little different. We do a little tweaks here and there. It's a little different than the book, but to see somebody that actually dives in and gives the time and effort to actually do the exercises and to learn the tools that they can use the rest of their life, you see at the end, sometimes it's like the fifth or sixth session. Sometimes it's the last session. Sometimes it's a week after. You just see this like just relaxing, but also this hope that I'm not going to live the rest of my life with this pain.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, so I was a biology major. That's how I got into public health. And I use the example. Sometimes it's easier to give people a physical example rather than this emotional example. And I tell them, if I broke my leg, right, people might well-meaningly might say, well, it's just going to take time. It's just going to take time and it'll heal. Go sit over there on the couch and eventually it'll get better. Right? Or read this book or whatever. And the deal is, there is some truth in that. I can sit on the couch and eventually my leg might heal, but the bone probably would not set correctly. Right? And if I sit there long enough, the muscles will atrophy, so that even if I did try to get up, it wouldn't work or be easy. And eventually I'll probably sit there long enough and go, gosh, I have forgotten why I ever wanted to walk anyway. I can change the channel on the TV with this little tuner. And so there I am, stuck on the couch, stuck. And a lot of grievers tell us that they feel stuck in that pain and hopelessness. And so the deal is, just like with the leg, it will happen faster and better if you do something, if you take action. And so the subtitle of the book is The Action Program for Moving Beyond Death, Divorce, and Other Losses. So with the leg, if I go to the doctor and he or she sets the leg and the bone is set correctly, and they put on a cast and I wear the cast and I wear the boot and I go to physical therapy and I do the exercises like they ask me to at home, that's what's going to cause that leg to heal correctly. It's not the fact that it does it on its own. It's the actions that I take in that time. Same thing here. You could sit on the couch and, eat bonbons and watch TV and be in the depths of your grief. And if some of you are there, I don't mean to make you feel bad about that. You just haven't learned any other better ways, right? And society tells us it just takes time. Don't feel bad. It could be worse. You could get another one, grieve alone, all those myths. And so through no fault of your own, you may be like that person sitting there just waiting for your heart to heal. This program gives you those action tools and steps that will help that healing happen faster and also more effectively. Absolutely more effectively.
Absolutely.
So that's kind of my little physical example of how it helps if you read the book, you do the exercises, and you mentioned doing it with somebody, not just doing it with a friend. You could do that, but the value of working with somebody like you, Kelli, or me, or others of our specialists is we're like the physical therapist, right? We can nudge you, right? We can say, are you doing those exercises? Let me teach you another one. Let me teach you the next step. And to be right there with us as we go through that healing process. And so it really does work best if you do it with someone who's a certified grief recovery method specialist, who's been through the training, they've got experience, and they are much better able to help you recover back to that place of hope.
Yeah.
If you let them work with you through those exercises.
And for that point is that, we in society are so prone to say, okay, use your intellect. So a lot of people don't know how to connect emotionally to a loss. They're like, okay, yeah, that happened. So I'm just going to let it go. And I'm just going to use, my brain to let it go or whatever,
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We are trained from young age on to discount our intuition, first of all. And a lot of times things that we have discounted in our intuition or didn't follow it, something then happens and we come back later after that event and go, oh, I wish I would have or should have or could have. And that's grief. When you come back with regrets, that's because maybe you have discounted your intuition. The second thing that goes is the half of our emotional being that addresses negative or sad or angry or frustration or anxious feelings. It's perfectly fine to, don't worry, be happy, if I could whistle, right? Or look on the bright side of life. God bless the life of Brian, right? So we are encouraged, cry and you cry alone, laugh and the world laughs with you. We are encouraged to diminish and to disavow any of those sad feelings. If you're going to cry, go to your room. Nobody ever says, if you're going to laugh like that, go to your room.
Right.
And so the only thing that's left for us is our intellect. And I don't know, the program's on 6 of 7 continents all around the world, but I don't know if the United States is kind of just more into this intellect and I can think myself through this and I can solve these problems. But that's exactly right. We try to think that, I solve millions of dollars worth of problems in my job, or I solve problems with my staff, or I solve problems with my family. Why can't I solve the feelings that I have? And so the problem is that grief is not an intellectual endeavor. It's an emotional endeavor.
Right.
And so you're trying to use the wrong tools. If you're trying to think your way out of it, you can't. Plus, when people are deep in that pain and heartbreak, your mind is cluttered. Your mind is fuzzy. Your mind is foggy. And if you've been to some sort of a healthcare profession, Probably they've given you pain medications or some sort of numbing medications, which just makes your mind even more numb. And so there really just isn't much of a way that we can solve this logically. We've got to address it from an emotional perspective. And I think that's one of the neat things about this program too, is it kind of fools you because there's a book to read and there's homework to do. Sounds very intellectual, doesn't it? Right? The book and there's homework. Okay, I can do this. I've taken classes before. It's not counseling. It's not therapy. It's a class. And so it's kind of attractive to people because they think they're going to learn things, and they do. But very quickly, the program moves them from the intellect to the heart.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, it's not a mental problem or an intellectual problem. It's a heart condition. It's a heart condition.
Yeah. One thing that you said about doctors, sometimes you're medicated and stuff. One thing about that is that when you're dealing with loss and grief, it's an emotional, like you said, it's not a brain thing, it's an emotion thing. We want to express those emotions. We don't want to suppress them. And with those medications, what it does is it suppresses it. So what happens when you get off medication? You feel it again. It comes back up, it bubbles back up.
Exactly. And I want to address that too. We had mentioned before we began the recording, the difference between a mental health issue and an emotional health issue. There are indeed mental health conditions for which medications help.
Absolutely.
Okay? There are. And so I don't mean to tell anybody who may be listening, well, just stop taking your meds.
Right.
I don't know. Neither of us are physicians. We're not here to diagnose or treat or anything like that. So before you make that decision, just be sure you talk with your medical care provider, right? Mental health conditions are things that happen up here. If you're paranoid, you're schizophrenic, you're bipolar, you are paranoid, or whatever they are, there are mental health conditions that affect how we act, how we behave, how we feel. But for the most people, what we're experiencing is an emotional situation, right? And they're different. They're different. The mental health and the emotional health things are different. And again, the medical care system, they're in a mell of a hess these days too. They don't have time to sit and talk about, well, tell me, Kelly, what's going on in your life?
Right.
What's happening? How's your mom? How's your marriage? What are your kids up to? Right? Because they got to see 17 patients in 45 minutes and yada, yada. And so it's also just as easy for them to just prescribe something. Right. And we are a quick fix society. Just give me something, doc. Just make it go away. Just give me something. Right. I mean, we're fast everything, fast food, fast service, fast this, fast internet. And so we want to solve this problem. And I tell people we didn't get this way overnight. We're not going to get better overnight. It takes the work, kind of circling back around to where we started this conversation. We didn't get this way overnight, so we can't just do something that's going to fix it overnight. We've got to unpack and unravel all that stuff that's been sitting in our heart literally for decades, right? In the class, we talk about having a backpack. When you're born, you come out with this brand new little empty backpack, and nobody teaches you healthy ways to deal with grief. So when losses happen, we just pick them up like rocks and put them in our backpack. And at first, maybe they're little things, they're pebbles, they're stones, what have you. But as we get older, they may be golf ball size or baseball size or grapefruit or basketball size. And our backpack gets full and it just weighs us down. And so we've got to learn to unpack those losses all the way back to childhood, because there may be patterns and trends in there that got us to where we are today. There may be behaviors that we learned as a child or learned in our family or in our culture that we have to unlearn in order to become healthy. So you got to do the work. And it's hard. And sometimes it can be painful to go back and look at all those things that you've just, kind of quietly put in your backpack. It can be hard to pull those back out and look at them, but you won't get better if you don't take them out, look at them, name them, give them voice to somebody who's a trained person who will not analyze, judge, criticize, or fix you. They're just going to listen and let that stuff come out. And so you got to do the work. You got to do the work.
Absolutely. And with that backpack analogy, if you think about it, if you have all these heavy rocks in your backpack, all those good memories of people, events, of things in your life are being crushed. So you can't really, you can't really even think about them, or they're so crushed that I think of the good memories of people or the good events in your life. They're almost like, I don't know if clouds would be a good analogy or something, but they bolster you up. They bring you up, right? They help you move forward in life. Those good things are always great to help keep you going, to give you hope. Well, if you have all these rocks that are pushing that down, you don't feel that. So you need to remove those rocks to feel those good things, to remember those things, remember the hope to push you forward.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it puts things in perspective. I mean, it is our nature, to think only about the negative things. If I asked you, I've got good news and bad news, what do you want first? Most people would actually say they want the bad news first because I want to start preparing for it. What do I have to do with it? And so yes, it does. It clouds and covers those good things because we tend to focus on the not so good ones, and putting those in perspective. One of the exercises is listing things that are both good events and not so good events, right? And putting it in perspective and saying, well, this happened, but I had forgotten all about that. So yeah, you got to do the work. You mentioned going forward. I was at a conference recently where the topic was ACEs, the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. And if you don't know what the ACE study is, you can Google it. Go to cdc.gov and put ACE study in the search finder. But basically, it talks about, this is a scientific study in public health that talks about how all the things, even from childhood, add up. They don't use the backpack analogy, but they add up, and they follow us through lifetime. And one of the things that in public health we're trying to work on now is building resilient communities. The flooding in Texas, or the shootings in whatever city it is today, or the fires that are, that we're always talking about wanting to bounce back, right? Resilient. And the example I used to use was, I'm in Ohio, so big, strong maple trees, oak trees, pine trees, when the wind comes along and the floods have come, they just fall straight over, maybe even pulling the roots up out of the ground. When I used to think about resilience, I thought about palm trees, right? They can have hurricanes and typhoons and all kind of things, and those palm trees are resilient, right? They bounce back. But at the conference this year, it's changing the way I talk about resilience. They talked about not wanting to bounce back, but wanting to bounce forward. And to me, Kelly, that's the hope, right? That's the hope, that I don't want to just bounce back. I want to bounce forward. I want there to be hope for a better future.
Right.
I want there to be hope for getting my joy back, and even in my posture, right? When I just did that, I stood up a little straighter. You mentioned earlier, you see people coming more relaxed, right? Mm-hmm. Because they're not over like this with that heavy backpack, but they feel more like this. And so resilience, I'm changing my language, is not bouncing back, it's bouncing forward. That's what we want people to do. And that's what I think this program teaches us how to do, is to figure out what's happened in the past that may have knocked us over or blown us over or pulled us up by the roots. Mm-hmm. And not just how do I bounce back, but how do I bounce forward? How do I go forward better with hope? How do I go forward better? Regardless, because you know what? More losses are going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, right? Absolutely.
And if we learn these tools and skills, maybe things won't go in our backpack, or at least not as many and not as deeply. And so we'll be able to kind of keep this, shoulders back, postures up, resilient attitude, no matter what happens next or in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. So in right now in society, we talk a lot about mental health. We use that phrase for everything. And there is mental health, like you talked about earlier. There's absolutely mental health. I'm not denying that. But I think the confusion is that we classify everything as mental health. I have an example from my daughter's childhood. This is before I was trained as a grief recovery specialist, so I didn't know what was going on. We had moved to another state, and she was meeting people, but there was people that had moved there as well. And every year she would lose a friend. They would move away. And she was really sad. And so we went to her pediatrician, and he's just like, you're depressed, and put on her record that she was chronically depressed and put her on medication. And it's now, in hindsight, it was like she wasn't clinically depressed. Now there is chronic depression. There is people that are clinically depressed, but I think we use that word. We use anxiety. We use that word depression a lot when she was grieving the loss of friendship.
Yeah, absolutely.
We moved forward, and we were at a different state because we've moved around a lot. We were in a different state, and her doctor, it was a Zoom not Zoom. They don't call them Zoom calls, but the tele visit. And she was asking my daughter if she was anxious. My daughter had a test that day. So yes, she was anxious, but that question didn't come up. She just answered yes. And the doctor marked that she was an anxious person and wanted to send her to a behavioral specialist. At that point, I was trained. I wasn't really part of the conversation because she was older and I wasn't really supposed to be. After she got off, because she was devastated that she had to go to a behavioral specialist. And I was like, she's anxious because of an exam.
Yeah.
But like you said, and it's not always the doctor's fault at all, because they have a lot of times 15 minutes per appointment. They don't have that time. But as a society and communication, we have to look at, more of it. Was it really chronic depression? Was it clinical depression? Was it clinical anxiety? Or was it something that was just temporary? It was just temporary, there.
Well, and even there, doctors, medical professionals aren't really taught the difference between mental health and emotional health either, right? And that's a large part of our work. It's not just seeing people who are in the depths of pain and sadness and sorrow, but in educating medical professionals, right? Mm-hmm. They are taught how to find the diagnosis for clinical depression or anxiety or those other kinds of things. But they don't even have classes in grief. They don't even have classes in grief. Now, there may be some who have an hour where they talk about grief, right? Or 2 hours, but that's not the same as being in this medical model, right? And so again, not to belittle physicians or medical personnel, they're not being taught this stuff. And so that's another part of our mission too, is to teach professionals the difference between mental health and emotional health, right? Because if they don't know any better, they can't do any better. And so there's a whole book called the DSM, the Diagnostic Something Manual. And it's a list. It's like a huge book with a list of medical diagnoses. And so that's what they've been trained in. If you want to get paid for this visit, you have to find something in this book that looks like what this child is experiencing. And they give it a diagnosis and they give it a number, and then insurance hopefully will pay for it. But the problem with that too is that once, and I thought what you were going to say is she was diagnosed as depressed when she was a child, and how that diagnosis followed her. Every year when she went to a new grade in school, the teacher or whoever gets that file and goes, oh, here's one who's depressed. And so when we're diagnosed and given a label, sometimes that follows us. And if that label isn't correct, and John James and Russell Friedman used to say, if you misdiagnose, there's a good chance you're going to mistreat. Right. And so that's a huge part of our mission. And again, for me, with a career in public health, most of what I do these days in the world of education is educating professionals, educating public health people, educating nurses, educating physicians, educating social workers to this whole untapped field of grief and grief recovery.
Yeah.
And so again, that's a part of our challenge too, is normalizing grief, right? It's not a mental health issue. It's an emotional health issue. And normalizing it and letting them know that there are programs like the grief recovery method. And you mentioned earlier too, helping children with loss. It's not for kids. It's for adults, parents, teachers, coaches, counselors. We believe it does take a village to raise a child. And so another part of our educational effort is teaching those adults in the village, right? So that if I go to school, my teachers and staff members there know about grief. If I go to church or Sunday school or temple or synagogue, that those religious leaders know about grief and they use the same language. If I'm on a volleyball team or a football team, my coach knows those terms. My parents know those terms. My pediatrician knows those terms. And so the community, the village, begins to find a new way to re-educate themselves and other adults, but also those kids, so that they know better, healthier ways to deal with these changes and losses that are emotional things, right? I mean, she moved and friends, she lost friends. Right. That's an emotional issue. We know how to deal with that, don't we? We know how to deal with that. But it's not by giving them a pill or a medication or sending them necessarily to behavioral therapy.
Right. They need to give it voice. They need to talk about it.
Exactly.
And it's like we talked, is that so often we're told as kids and adults to hide those feelings, that sadness is not a good thing. It's not, it's not appropriate to cry. It's not a good thing to go to your room.
Right.
And so we're not giving the youth and even the adults the ability to process. And so then they do think, wait, there's something wrong with me. if I have to hide in my room because I'm crying or I'm sad, upset about somebody leaving or other things that happen in our life, a pet dying, moving, a bad test grade. I mean, so many things.
Yeah.
If I have to go in my room every time to cry, there's something wrong with me.
Exactly. And that takes us back to that more disease model, medical model, etc. And so again, I tell people too, have you ever been laughing so uproariously at the table? My kids used to love it when I would spew out of my nose whatever I was drinking, right? Nobody ever once said to me, Mom, if you're going to laugh like that, go to your room.
Right.
Why can I sit there and laugh myself silly, but I can't sit there and have a sad, an anxious, an angry, a frustrating feeling? I did a talk for public health professionals just a couple weeks ago, and I talked about this very thing. And at the lunch break, one of the men in the group came up to me almost with tears in his eyes. He said, "Oh my gosh, when you gave that example, I said that exact thing to my son, my 4-year-old son at the table last night. If you're going to cry like that, go to your room." He said, "I said that exact thing last night. I'm going to be a different parent because of what I know." I want to mention too, on the griefrecoverymethod.com website, there is a tab at the top for podcasts. And there was a recent one, I don't remember how recently, maybe I can find it, back around the end of June. And it was a couple, Gwen and Alfonso Jones, I think. And the dad talked about, and they're both grief recovery method specialists. And the dad talked about how before his grief recovery method experience, if his child, his son, his young child had come to him and said, "I lost a crayon. I lost a crayon." Before his grief recovery and helping children with loss training, he would have said, "It's a crayon, for God's sake. You got a box of 64. There are 63 left. Pick another one." Some of them, and that dismisses and demeans what that child has just shared with you, which means the next time they have a loss, they're probably not going to tell you because you didn't hear them this time. And so I love it. And this is in the podcast. And he said, so now, I kind of have learned to reframe it. So if my son says to me, he's lost a crayon and he's got some emotion with that, "Honey, which one was it? Which crayon?" "It was the green one, Dad." "Oh, I know green is your favorite. Oh my gosh, you must be so sad about that." Right? And to validate that he's just shared with you that losing that green crayon, that was his favorite one. And then the other part of the helping children with loss and even grief recovery method is we can't change what's happened, but we always have choices how we respond to it. And so now once he's acknowledged and validated and affirmed that his son is upset, now they can start to have a conversation about what choices does his son have. Do they want to stop right now and look for that green crayon? Do they want to find a color in the box of 64 that's similar to that crayon? Will that work? If we go to the store, do you want to buy another, maybe a smaller box of 8? I don't even know if they still sell them in 8s and 16, but that has that traditional green. What are the choices? And once you start to give a child or an adult permission to think about choices, they stop feeling about themselves that they are a victim, and they realize that they have some say in what's happening, right? Because when we are dismissed and our grief is minimized, that's what makes us feel like the victim. "Oh, poor pity me, poor pity me." That's the world's smallest record player playing that song, by the way. But and basically what it is we feel like we're out of control. When things have happened to us and we don't think we have any way of fixing it or changing it, intellect isn't helping, we feel out of control, out of power. And by affirming that loss of the green crayon, it was his favorite. I can't imagine how bad that feels for you. I used to like the purple crayon, and I lost my purple crayon when I was a child, telling similar stories. But then turning to this idea of, that's really awful. I'm very sorry that happened. But let's think about some choices. And this goes back to getting that hope back and bouncing forward. I could sit here all day and complain about losing my green crayon, but what do I want to do going forward? How can I get my hope back?
Right. I love that, because you don't want to just stay there and just say, "Oh, well, this is what I'm feeling, and I'm just going to stay in that and share it with everybody. I'm just going to tell everybody my pain and stay in that," like you said, victimhood, but
Right.
making those choices and moving forward. It just reminds me that for me, when my mom died, and other things happened, and I held on to that grief, and I didn't empty my backpack, and I didn't give it voice. For me, it came out as anger and bitterness.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it came out not to that person. Well, my mom was gone. She died, but it came out. But even when I was angry at somebody that was still alive, it often didn't come out to them.
Right.
I
Right.
would push it down. I kind of say that it's like a beach ball that you hold underwater, and you hold it there and you're holding it there. And it gets to a point where you can't hold on any longer, and it comes out of the pool and it explodes. And it explodes over, for me, it would explode over my coworkers or
Yeah.
innocent people that had nothing to do with where that anger was coming from. And that anger was really emotional grief and loss and sadness.
Absolutely. And disrespect and have other people minimize it and dismiss it. Absolutely right. One of the examples, I mean, that's a great example with the beach ball. Another example I use is a tea kettle, right? And it's got all this energy, this emotional energy down in there from all those things that have happened that are in our backpack. And when people are told, don't feel bad, just get another one, just takes time, grieve alone, eat something, you'll feel better. We haven't even talked about those things. When we're told all those things, it's like putting a cork in the tea kettle. Don't talk about it. Just keep it inside. And we become a storage tank rather than a processing plant. And eventually, when something else happens and it turns up the fire under the tea kettle, it's either going to implode and it will eat you up with things like blood pressure and migraines and heart attacks and diabetes, or it will explode, right? Imagine that tea kettle. If the fire gets turned up, that energy's got to go somewhere.
Right.
We have phrases for that too, don't we? Going postal, right? Road rage. What's the ultimate feeling with road rage? Fear. My God, he cut me off. We could have had an accident. Right? But we take out those pent up feelings and we call it road rage. Kind of going back to mental health versus emotional health and this particular piece of the conversation. I listen to the news much differently than I used to now that I'm a grief recovery specialist. Any of these stories that you hear about somebody where there was a mass shooting or there was this event or somebody completed suicide or there was a murder suicide or whatever it is. If you listen long enough, first of all, they're going to say, well, he has a history of mental health issues. He has a history of mental health issues. If you listen long enough, I remember Jonesboro, Arkansas, when somebody came out on recess and shot people. And they were talking to the little boy who did the shooting later on and just talking with him. Well, his mom and dad had divorced and they moved far away from each other. He had to change schools. He was living with his dad. He didn't get to see how many grief stories are in there. That's not a mental health issue for that child. I think he was 10 at the time. It's a grief story. And his grief had just piled up in his little tea kettle to where the only thing he knew to do about it was
explode.
Exactly. And so even in these news stories, they perpetuate the idea that people who do these things have mental health issues, and some of them may and do, right? But listen to the story and see if you can unravel it back to what were the changes or the losses, right? What were the losses that somebody had? Workplace shootings, there's usually something, they got fired or they had an argument with a colleague or they didn't get the promotion they wanted.
Or they had a relationship that didn't work out in there.
And that's the other thing too, is we don't just grieve in one aspect of our life. We grieve in all of them. We have griefs and losses at work, griefs and losses at home, griefs and losses in our community, griefs and losses in our world, right? I mean, it's almost like don't listen to the news, right?
Yes.
There's so much going on. And all of that grief gets put in the backpack. We don't have a work-related backpack and a home-related backpack and a kid-related backpack. It's just all in there, all mixed up. And it gets heavy and we've got to do something with it. And our body knows it needs to do something to take care of that energy, right? You want to be a processing plant or a storage tank. It's got to do something to take care of that energy. And if we don't use these kinds of tools, most of the things we do to get rid of that energy are not very helpful or very helpful.
Yeah, they don't go away. It's just, it's just a Band-Aid on it temporary to make you feel better. But unless you empty that backpack, like we talked about, unless you empty it, it's still there because grief doesn't just go away because we wish it, in our mind, grief go away. We need to actually emotionally deal with it.
Yeah. It's the action program. Again, I'm a biology major and I use the example. Have you ever been so physically nauseous? You just knew you could feel better if you could throw up and people, you're shaking your head. People, yeah, I sat by the toilet so many times, right? Well, the deal is our hearts get emotionally nauseous. And, even with throwing up, vomiting physically, it could be messy. It could be embarrassing. It could sting when it comes through your throat. Same thing with our emotional ills. It could be messy. I could react in a different way to my boss or to colleagues. It may be messy. It may be painful. It may sting a little. That, you got to do the work. It hurts when you bring these things back up and talk about them, but you've got to get them out. I tell people we need an emotional vomit, a verbal vomit, an emotional puke. We've got to get them out. And then I tell them too, I said, and even nature shows us that has to happen. Things have to get cleaned out. Right? When it's been real hot and humid and muggy and just oppressive, right? And the next thing happens is we get a big storm. And the next day, watch for this, the sky is so blue and so pretty, right? Even nature, even weather says when things get really just stuck in there, we've got to have some kind of a release in order for it to be better. And with the vomiting, when you finally throw up, you feel better.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even if you have to clean up the mess, you feel better, right? You got to come out. Same thing with these emotional feelings. They have to come out. And again, doing it with this method, with someone who's trained to help you go through it. I tell people, we're the people, Kelli and I, we're the people who, when you're sitting there having this emotional puke, we're going to be the ones who are holding your hair back so it doesn't get in the mess, right? We're the people to walk through that with you. There's one other thing kind of in this realm that I wanted to mention too, and that's the difference between trauma and grief. A lot of people talk about, oh my gosh, I have so much trauma, and certainly they may, right? Trauma is a big buzzword these days. In fact, sometimes we even use it when that's not really what it is. I used to say driving downtown to work was a traumatic experience because you got this stop and go on the freeway, that it was traumatic. Well, was it really? It's natural traffic, but it was scary. It was uncomfortable. And the deal is, trauma absolutely can be a real thing. Trauma is what happens. Grief is what lingers. They're two sides of the same coin. And a lot of organizations and people and agencies are doing trauma-informed care, which is all well and good because people need to understand trauma and trauma-informed care. But for the most part, they're not doing grief-informed care. And so that's what we do. And the deal is, you can do all the trauma-informed care that you want to, but if you're not addressing the grief, that's what comes back to bite you in the butt years later with panic attacks, with bulimia, with anorexia, with nightmares, with whatever. You've got to address the grief that comes with the trauma. And so again, I think that's another piece that we do. A lot of people are doing trauma-informed care, but our value and our benefit is that we then know how to get to this grief piece so that it doesn't, to deal with it, to resolve it, so that it doesn't come up and bite you down the road.
One of the things that I've noticed is that sometimes people are afraid to do the work. And personally, I've had recently, even being a specialist, I lost a really close friend of mine. She died. I didn't lose her. She died. Got to reframe that. And doing the work, I was like, why am I having trouble? Why am I procrastinating? I know these tools work. Why am I procrastinating? And it was really strange because I realized I had the same feeling that we all do to a point. Is I was like, if I do the work, I'm going to lose my friend. Am I going to ever have a friend like that again? I'm going to lose that. And it was just like this aha moment going, I teach this. I know that this is really important to do, but the fear of doing the work was like the letting go was so hard, but I can never let go of, I'm always going to have those memories and the friendship and those things. You don't lose them, but it's that fear. It still is that fear of, right. Do the work. I've got to let go of that person. And you're not really letting go of that person. You're letting go of the pain of losing them, of that stuff. And you're not letting go of the person. But even I kind of was like, procrastinated because of that.
And we are so culturally and socially programmed to stuff it inside.
Yes.
And we're so misinformed, and society keeps misinforming us. Our job as grief recovery method specialists is really an uphill job, because for every good thing we tell somebody, the media, the society, the church, the school, the coach, tells you 27 times why you should still feel sad or what the problems will be. So we are so culturally programmed, and even us, it's built in us. It's become kind of nature. But go back to what you said earlier. In when we do this work, yes, we look at the things that were painful rocks, but it also unearths or uncovers those positive memories
Yes.
that we weren't able to see before. And it puts them in a new light, in a new perspective. And the brain, going back to a good thing, the brain sees, stores, and records all that stuff. We cannot make you forget that good friend. We cannot make you forget that friend. Now, if somebody gets Alzheimer's or dementia, that's another story. But this process will not cause you to forget that person. It will help you to remember them in a more accurate way. It creates a more complete and accurate memory picture of who the person was. And if there are things in there that are kind of negative, it teaches you too, what do I need to do with those? Do I need to apologize to that person? Do I need to forgive them? Or do I just need to tell them what a wonderful person they were and how much I loved them and how much I miss them? And I will never forget that time at the beach when we did yada, yada, yada. Right. And so the tools even go so far as to teach you how to deal with those memories that are surfaced. I taught this class in a medium security men's prison several years ago. And one of the guys in the class, on the last day, I asked kind of for their reflections and what was the class like. I love this. He said, we take a lot of classes in here. We get points for all the classes we take. And I've done stuff like this before where they want us to dig up all this stuff. He said, but this is like archaeology. You helped me dig it up, polish it off, and put it up on a shelf, right? It's not just digging it up. It's digging it up, polishing it off, and helping people figure out what to do with it next, right? I just love that description. We take a lot of classes. We've done a lot of stuff like this, but this is different. This is like archaeology. You teach us to dig it up, how to polish it off, and how to put it up on that shelf.
That's a beautiful
Isn't it though?
Yeah.
I just thought that was so profound. Yeah. I wonder where he is today. Here's to him.
That's so wonderful. Yeah. And
anyway,
thoughts you have on anything, whether it's mental illness, emotional?
Yeah. Oh gosh. I mean, I was a trainer. The class is 4 days long, so I could talk for 4 days on grief. Trust me. There is so much more, but I think the final thing I would say is, and I'm sure you're going to give people the resources too, visit the griefrecoverymethod.com website. There's all kinds of information. There are patient testimonials or client testimonials there. Please get in touch with Kelli. She is an amazing grief recovery method specialist. She can serve you both in person and online. COVID moved everything to online. So if you're not in her neighborhood in Arizona, no problem. So get in touch with Kelli. If you've been participating in these podcasts for a while, you kind of know who she is. She's a wonderful person. So that would be my next thing is so the first step is just looking for information. The second step is contact Kelli and get in touch with her. She can see you as a grief recovery method client or a helping children with loss client. Take that time and do that work for yourself so that you can be resilient and bounce forward.
I love that.
With more hope.
Yes. And I wanted to thank you so much for being on my podcast, Lois. And I also wanted to say, if you're in Ohio, Starfish Associates can completely help you. And I appreciate you telling them about me. But really, and Lois and I agree on this, if you want to do this and Lois is not the person, and then if I'm not the person, we can help you find the person, because Absolutely. Our hearts are really for you to feel better, to bounce forward, to have that renewed hope. That's why I called my company Renewed Hope, to have that hope again, to go forward in life and not to be stuck. And that's like the most important thing for us. It's not, you have to come to me, for me, it's really who's best for you.
Absolutely.
I will put Lois's information below, her information, but if you want to say where they can reach you at.
Sure. So if you go to griefrecoverymethod.com, in the About Us tab, you scroll to the bottom, you put in Columbus, Ohio, and like 25 miles radius, and my microsite will come up. Okay. And there's a way there that you can contact me by email and by phone. And we just recently launched a new website. It's not terribly filled with stuff yet, but that's Starfish Associates LLC. And so you can find myself and a couple of my associates there too. But kind of going back to Kelli's point too, the grief recovery method has been around all over the planet for over 40 years. We have specialists just about everywhere. I love doing this work in person. And so again, if you're in East Tuscaloosa, wherever, right, contact one of us, check out that directory. And maybe we can find somebody that you could work with in person. I just think that's the cream of the crop. And if not, then we will help you find the right person for you to work with online.
Yeah.
So yeah, a large directory, lots of people who are trained, all with these big, huge, wonderful open hearts. And we all do the same grief recovery method. There is a standardized program that we go through. It's evidence-based. There's research that shows that it works. And so that's why we all do exactly the same thing. And there's comfort in that too, knowing that if you do it with Kelli, you'll get the same program if you did it with me or with one of the other people in the directory.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Yeah. And to say that I do a lot of mine online because for me, because of my, I was going to say traumatic brain injury and I have a chronic illness, sometimes it's easier for me to not have to travel. And so that's why I do it online. And for those of you out there that may have the same situation, that's why it's great that it is online as well now.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so if you're walking through loss or you're supporting someone who is, remember the most important thing is you're not broken. You're grieving and there is a path forward. There is hope. And you can connect with me on YouTube at Renewed Hope. It's Renewed Hope Grief Recovery, or the podcast is Renewed Hope After Loss, or visit renewedhopegriefrecovery.com. Again, a lot of resources are on the griefrecoverymethod.com. Both Lois and I are on there as well. There's a lot of great resources. Please contact us. Let's help you. So until next time, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you so much, Lois.
Thanks for having me, Kelli. Thank you.